Hello, I guess I'll just start by introducing myself one last time. My name is Brennan Bruschini, and for my final project, I chose the topic of ensuring quality of life in the elderly. And I thought this was pretty important because on average now, people that turn 65 years old have about 20 years, live about 20 more years on average, which is a pretty long life expectancy for the average person. However, at this age, they're also entering the stage of late adulthood, which is kind of your final stage of life. And to be a little bit more specific as to why I chose this topic, I've worked at an old person home. It's an over 55 assisted living facility, so it is probably considered a nursing home, but we don't really call it that. And I noticed, even though it's over 55, most of my residents are over the age of 80. And it's hard not to notice that the ones that are even older, who are pretty close to being centenarians, typically are in a pretty good shape and almost probably better shape on all levels than the younger ones who are maybe in their high 70s, low 80s. And what two ladies in general come to mind, their names are Marion and Norma. Marion is 102 years old, and she's incredible. She can have a great conversation with you. There are some obvious, short-term memory things, but she always remembers my name. She gets around great without a walker. She's always in and out of her chair. And she's got a lot of friends. She's very popular. And then you have Norma, who is about 20 years younger than Marion, and she is pretty sickly. She's always in and out of the hospital, doesn't really participate in any social events, and you really can't even have a conversation with her because she's just kind of dementia-ridden. Her situation's really unfortunate, but I chose this topic because I wanted to examine, is this luck versus lifestyle, and maybe what we can do to prepare ourselves so that maybe we can live our elderly years a little bit more like Marion and less like Norma. So for my first topic, I decided to talk about physical and biological development in elderly adults. This is a time when our physical appearance is similar to that in the Middle Ages. However, in our middle-aged life, however, the changes we'd see during midlife typically are pretty amplified. During older adulthood, some other physical changes that can be expected is, a shortening in height. You typically lose weight. You lose hearing, and you have a pretty big decline in vision, and you typically move pretty slow. Along with vision, there's a pretty big decrease in all the other senses. One statistic that stuck out in particular that I found in our book was that on average about 63% of adults over the age of 70 reported loss of hearing, 74 suffered from impaired taste, and 22 lost some smell. Also, diseases such as osteoporosis and arthritis are very common in older adulthood. Your lungs tend to lose plasticity. Your brain is starting to lose volume. Over the ages of 20 and 90, your brain's going to lose about 5 to 10% of weight, and this includes volume on key structures in the brain, such as your hippocampus or your frontal cortex. However, to kind of tie in some outside studies besides our book, I did find one longitudinal study that was conducted in 2008, and it followed about 152 men and 206 women. It found that the participants that were considered very active and maintained an active lifestyle tend to have less bone loss and had way better balance than those that were considered inactive. So being active has been proven to help you counteract these, physical diseases such as osteoporosis. And then there was also another study that was conducted in 2003, which benefits maybe people who feel that activity isn't really for them. And it found a connection between spirituality and religion that in a better physical health in the elderly, pretty much found that healthy participants that frequently attended church services had a lower risk of fatality and just were overall better protected from cardiovascular disease. So again, a good option for people who maybe don't feel that activity is great for them. And also it really applies to Marion because Marion's incredibly religious and she's also incredibly active. So those two concepts just really make sense to me. And then I went into cognitive development. Overall, elderly people just don't have as good of cognitive control as younger people. A lot of this is due to the shrinking of the prefrontal cortex that we discussed a little earlier. During this time, your executive function is declined, memory is declined, especially explicit memory. Selective attention is decreased. However, sustained attention doesn't seem to be decreased. It seems to remain pretty normal once you reach later adulthood. Again, I pulled out some outer studies that kind of examine some things that you can do to help you soften the blow of these cognitive changes. One study conducted in 2008 found that specifically it was aerobic exercise was associated with less deterioration of the hippocampus. And anything that's going to cause less deterioration or help your brain not deteriorate is going to make it you less at risk for cognitive diseases such as dementia or Alzheimer's. Another longitudinal study followed over 2,832 people for over 10 years, and it found it was trying to determine if training sessions for the memory, speed of processing, and reasoning had effect on cognitive function, and it was actually found that it did. Based on self-reports, people that underwent this training were better in all of these aspects than people that did not. And they actually also, 60% of those who underwent the training reported being better cognitively at the end of the 10 years than they were at the beginning, which is really saying something because at the end of the experiment, they were 10 years older. So just doing this training actually, they say, increased their cognitive function, which is really impressive and gives weight to the fact that that might be something people should look into. And then last but not least was socio-emotional development. Pretty much, many people experience loss in later adulthood, loss of loved ones, of friends. Because of this, there are many less relationships in which people really feel attached when they're older. However, it was very interesting that anxious attachment seems to decline during this period, but also a pretty big advantage is if you have children when you're elderly, because children play a very large role in the socialization of elderly adults. So those that don't have children tend to be at a bit of a disadvantage. And a pretty constant theme throughout this course has been that positive and good relationships have led to better physical health and longer lives, and that's just as relevant in older adulthood. Even though friendships aren't typically as pursued in later adulthood, older adults typically prefer to just stick with their close-knit friends and not really branch out and make new friendships. Friendship is still important because there's just more relationships which can really affect a person. And just to kind of provide an example as to how important good and healthy relationships are in a life, I did find a longitudinal study that found that men who lost their spouse showed a more significant decline in mental health, morale, and social functioning as compared 4 years after they had become widowed, as compared to people who had spent those 4 years married. So again, it's just another example of how if you maintain these relationships with your family and your loved ones and friends, how you might be better in the long run for it. And then with that, I started to look into theories in which I thought were the most accurate and the most reliable. I found two, one pertaining to socio-emotional development and one pertaining to biological development in the elderly. I thought that the activity theory, which was proposed to explain social-emotional development in late adulthood, held a lot of weight because it states that people who are active and involved during elderly years are more satisfied in life. And this is really consistent with all the previously mentioned studies that people that were active and social had better, less deterioration of brain, better just overall cognitive function and physical function. And it also really applies to Marion. Marion's incredibly active for her age, and she seems to be really healthy, and obviously she's lived a long life because of it. So to me, this theory seems to be pretty accurate, and it holds a lot of weight. And then for the hormonal stress theory, which more applies to like the biological aging process, it kind of states and argues that the body doesn't deal as well as stress as it ages, meaning that the hormones that are released to deal with stress stay at higher levels when they are released for a prolonged amount of time, and this can leave you really susceptible to certain diseases. And I thought this made a lot of sense because it's pretty much was validated because it's been consistent that exercise and activity have been associated with good cognitive and physical health in adults. Well, exercise is also a really good way to combat stress. And it seems likely to me that elderly people who are active age better because they have another way to combat stress than just raising their hormone levels and having it being raised for a long amount of time. So if you're exercising, you're kind of combating your stress in a different way, and this is what leads to better aging. And having less disease and less deterioration. So to me, that made a lot of sense, and these two theories just seem to be really consistent with all the information and research that I had found. So just to kind of wrap things up, I want to link it back to how this research is kind of relevant to me and how it's going to benefit me. And really it's just going to help me in my future career. I want to be a nurse, and with being a nurse, it's probably guaranteed that you're going to be working with elderly people, maybe on a daily basis, but if not, certainly very often. And now with this information, I'm going to be able to better understand my patients and understand my elderly patients and what they're going through. And I'll also be capable of informing them why they're experiencing these changes, what's actually happening in their body that's making them do this, and how they can kind of combat this and make them feeling better and more like themselves for as long as they can. So this research project was really beneficial to me, and really just not in my future career, but also in what I'm working now. I have a much better understanding for my residents at the old person home. I can feel sympathy for what they're going through, and it's really just made me better overall to them. And then just a little bit in conclusion, this project has merely made me realize that it's important for all people of all ages to educate themselves on the practices and methods that have been proven to result in successful aging. The choices that we make now are going to affect our future. And it seems to me that our future has the ability, the potential to last way longer than it ever did before. So I guess if that's, I'll leave you to that. I guess that would be my final message. All right. Thank you very much.